and it's like immaculately kept. It's this Victorian hotel with high ceilings, beautifully furnished, and it's just a really nice place to stay. Went up the stairs, there's nobody else in the hotel at all. And so you'd think that it would feel spooky, but I wasn't spooked at all. And we stayed the night there, and everything, nothing really happened. And we've had this kind of experience at several different places. So I like to say that I scare the ghosts away from most of these places because I don't get these feelings. And it's not because I'm a skeptic or a believer. I'm actually neither one. I'm just like Sharon, my wife, will say, I've had these experiences, and yeah, I believe you because she's a very trustworthy person. But I've just never had the experiences myself. Now, going to Chinese camp, I did have this feeling of there's something there. And I can't really put a finger on it. There was no specific instance where I felt like something on my back or a spirit passed by me or anything like that. It was just an overall feeling of just this kind of like a veil on the place is the best way I can describe it. That this place has been, and you even mentioned that it's kind of been preserved in time. You go back in time. And so we were both so fascinated by this that I decided to write this book. And we're both also fiction writers. And so we've both written a fictional short story, each of us separately, about a ghost story about Chinese camp. And mine is entirely based on the history of Chinese camp and what a ghost might have looked like. So it's just a hugely fun place. And you wouldn't think that a lot of people just drive past these places on the highway. This is one of the places that people will just drive past.
I didn't even know anything about Chinese camp. And I was actually contacted by the city council because they wanted me to write a story about it, which I did. And we did an investigation. So I had something like 15 people with me. So we did get a lot of evidence. The place is definitely haunted. One of the council members also too was telling me that Mark Twain would also too visit Chinese camp. Did you ever hear anything like that, Stephen?
I didn't find any evidence that he was directly there, but he was in that area. So it's entirely possible that he was. There's a Mark Twain house on Highway 49,
right,
just north of Sonora, I believe. I have to look it up, but Sonora itself is just about 15 minutes north of Chinese camp. It's all of these towns in that what they call the Southern Mines area are kind of clustered together. There's Copperopolis, there's Columbia, there's Chinese camp, and there were many other towns that are no longer there. There was once a town about a mile to the east of Chinese camp that was called Salvador or Salvador camp, and it was preceded Chinese camp, and they ended up, all the Chinese people got kicked out of there and went over to the Chinese camp and started living over there. Camp Salvador became known as East Chinese camp. It's not there anymore. There's no trace of it.
Stephen, I'm not a psychic.
There are all these different towns.
Stephen, I'm not a psychic, but looking at you and knowing your accomplishments, I have a very funny feeling that one day you're going to write a book about the town of Bodie.
It's possible. We've been there. That's one of our favorite ghost towns. We've been to a number of different ghost towns because we both love the old history. And we have been to Bodie. Sharon hadn't been there, interestingly enough, and I had been as a teenager, and I haven't been back since. And so we just went back in the last year, and definitely would recommend going there.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And it is included in my book called Sierra Highway, which is Highway 395. It's a detour off of 395. And so I already have written a book, a little bit section of a book anyway, about Bodie.
Stephen, do you have your book on you right now? I would like to look at it.
I do. I have two books.
You have an outstanding cover on there.
Well, thank you. This is the book. This is Chinese camp, and this is an old mercantile store that was, I can't remember the name of it now. It was not the Rose and Bloom New York store, but across the street from that, and it was next to the Fandango House. Now, a lot of people say the Fandango House is this big two-story building that was there, and I'll actually show the back cover. this is what people call the Fandango House. It actually wasn't. This is just a home. The Fandango House was next door to this, and the Fandango House, for people who may not know, is kind of like a brothel. And you go in there and dance with the girls, and they entertain you upstairs and so forth. And you have a drink or two or three or four in the saloon. And so this was right next to that, and this was a store. I'm going to show you another book that also has a picture of Chinese camp on it.
Oh.
This is my wife's collection of short stories, and this is the boarding house, the Elizabeth Fox boarding house that is there. And as you can see, it looks like a haunted house. Whether it's haunted or not, I don't know. But it looks like a haunted house, and it's got an interesting history because it was built in Montezuma, which is down the road. It no longer exists, but it was built in Montezuma. Montezuma burned down in 1865 or thereabouts, and they took this house and they moved it, lock, stock, and barrel, to Chinese camp. And so we thought this is this really spooky house, so we're going to use this as the cover of her. This is actually her debut book, and we're going to use this as the cover of this collection of spooky stories we have. And then on the back, another picture from Chinese camp is a place called Slinsky Alley, which was next door to the hotel, the biggest hotel there at the time, the Garrett House, that was owned by a guy named Count Selinsky, and he really was a Polish count who was driven out of Poland, and he became first a miner and then a hotel owner. And this alley there, the hotel is no longer there, but the alley is named after him.
Stephen, that's just some fascinating information. I have to also too ask you. You used to work for the Fresno Bee and the Visalia Times Delta or something like that.
Yeah.
I used to, I was born and raised in Fresno. I lived in Visalia for a while. Were you born in Fresno?
Yes, I was born in Fresno. I went to high school in Fresno, went to Bullard High, went to Fresno State, got my degree in journalism there, and worked down in Tulare at the Advanced Register, and then at the time Delta, which is right about 10 miles north of there, for about 3 years before I moved on to the Bee.
And how did you and your wife get into writing? Did you write all your life, starting as a child, or?
I think the first story I wrote was in 11th grade in a creative writing class, and they assigned it to be a minimum of 3 pages, and I wrote an 11-page story, and so I thought, I kind of have a knack for this. This is fun, and I wanted to be a novelist, but I figured there's no money in being a novelist, so I'm going to go to work for the newspapers. Well, flash forward about 30 years, and now newspapers are in the tank, and I get laid off a couple of times, and I'm thinking, why don't I just go back to work and do what I wanted to do initially and write books? And I ended up writing more nonfiction than fiction, but I've written a few novels.